Hello everyone and welcome to Celebrating Cinema. We're back for a summer special. I'm joined by Hugo.
Hey, what's up?
And I'm joined by filmmaker, film critic, and connoisseur of video essays, Scout Tafoya.
Very, very, very pleased to be here. Thank you guys so much for having me.
So Hugo, why have you gathered us all here?
Yeah, so Scout and one of his friends and colleagues, Tucker Johnson, have made a fantastic video essay series that's available on Scout's Vimeo account, Honors Zombie, which is called The End of History. And it's a 10-part video essay series that is basically doing two things at the same time. At the one hand, it's exploring the whole filmography of Tony and Ridley Scott. At the other hand, it's also painting a picture of American cinema as it was then, as it unfolded, and where it is now. And it's not necessarily a pretty picture in the sense that I think Scout and Tucker very succinctly managed to capture also a sense of loss, a near end feeling almost of where we are at now, aesthetically, philosophically, culturally as well in American cinema. And I think this is very interesting here at Celebrating Cinema. As the name of our podcast, Scout, suggests, we do want to celebrate cinema, but also by being quite critical of the things that we are engaging with, the things that are being offered to us as well. So, what you did with Tucker is fantastic for me, that through the love of these very distinctive cinematic voices, you found a way to also critique the medium itself and basically where we are at now. So basically, I want to have a discussion about all of those things, all the ideas that have fed into making this video essay series, but also I think many other topics and themes and issues will arise from it. And now we're talking about the current state of cinema. First of all, I would like to ask you what you've thought of this film year 2022 so far, because I know that every year you also kind of write these very in-depth essays about the end of the year, where we are at with cinema. So I'm kind of wondering if you could give like a, let's say, an update. Now we're almost at 3/4 of the year.
At the risk of eating my words a little bit, I thought it's mostly been a pretty decent year. I mean, the thing too is that I've been kinder to myself than ordinary by not engaging with a lot of the stuff that I knew I really wasn't going to find a way into anyway. You know, there are a couple of things that you kind of had to sort of watch just out of sort of car crash morbid curiosity. But for the most part, I've managed to stay away from things that seemed like they were actively going to make me furious. And I've been fortunate that I've really only had a couple of truly mediocre to bad experiences, specifically with like theatrical releases and stuff. The movie Men drove me completely up a wall.
Thank you. Thank God. Oh, Jesus, God, you can't imagine how much I hate that fucking film.
Yeah, that was pretty inexcusable, that film. I did a whole podcast appearance of somebody just talking about the terror of elevated horror movies, and there's really nothing worse than a horror filmmaker who has an idea. No, in general, I really, and part of it is again curation, but the sad thing is that a lot of the great stuff I saw unfortunately went straight to streaming. I was thinking specifically of Adrian Lynn's Deep Water and how
Yeah.
wonderful and rich that was. Or I mean, obviously it's a TV show, so it's a little different. But Olivier Assayas's 8-part remake of Irma Vep, I was
Exactly. Yeah.
really, really taken with
I
that.
love
But
that.
yeah, right. I mean, like, just I think that to me is probably the best thing he's done and may ever do. But who knows? But then I don't know. Like, there was some stuff that really kind of caught me by surprise. But other things that I should have known going into it were going to be great. Like I saw Detective versus Sleuths the other day, and that was incredible form. Just, oh man, Wai Ka-fai, the only director that Johnny To will just cede his authority to. You're like, you know what? You're too smart. You're too fucking crazy. We're gonna do exactly what you say. I liked Nope a lot. I liked Maverick a lot. The new Nick Cave doc was great. The new Cronenberg was great. There's
Yeah.
just been yeah, and Roland Emmerich, who is my vulgar hero, his new one, I really loved that, Moonfall. Oh, I'm so happy I saw that in theaters. That was such a blast. And then of course there's the new Soderbergh, there's a new Richard Linklater, there's a new Peter Strickland. There's just like there's a big variety of stuff now, from Jackass movies to a lot of great, Korean and Chinese big budget spectacle. I'm really excited to see Restart the Earth, the Louis Koo film.
I'm very
Really looking.
excited about that one as well. Yeah.
I really can't wait. Yeah, Emergency Declaration looks like a lot of fun. It's just like the kind of nuts and bolts action thing that we don't really do anymore. Where if we're doing it, it's got to have a star, so it's going to be a Liam Neeson thing or a Gerard Butler thing. And unfortunately, those have become genres unto themselves, and people don't really see those as being worth their doing unless that So it's like it's kind of an uneasy alliance. Where I always like the Liam Neeson things. I kind of enjoy their I
Their
don't know. There's some,
straightforwardness.
they
There's,
really
there's there's
are.
something
Yeah.
poetic in their simplicity. I agree with. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's really the kind of the only version of something like Emergency Declaration we get in a given year. But there's no denying that even that basically as good as a director for something like that is going to get will be Martin Campbell. And I like what Martin Campbell's doing now. I like this kind of looser late period he's in, but the images are still very solid. In general, weirdly, I got shown up. I spent all of the last year complaining about how bad everything is, and then lo and behold, there were a couple of really great movies. But of course, the things that I've loved and had a good time watching are not the kinds of things that are going to kind of make
Yeah,
waves in.
exactly. Or sell a lot of tickets at the box office. So then maybe to counterpoint that, can we talk about then the disappointment that did feed into the video essay series that you made? And then I think retroactively we can, let's say, slot Tony and Ridley Scott back into that conversation, because I think we can reverse engineer it a little bit. But what is it about contemporary mainstream cinema that makes, I feel, a lot of critics maybe kind of anxious about where we are at now, where we are going to, and also, frankly, makes for very lackluster box office support, except for the obvious candidates that come from Disney and Marvel and whatnot?
I mean, the thing is that there is no denying that the culture that is currently giving birth to all of the mass market cultural objects right now is perhaps the worst and most depressing that it's ever been. Because thanks to the rise of streaming and this kind of bastardized version of, auteur theory as it's filtered down 7, 8 times throughout culture to where we are now, it has become possible to essentially give people these kind of formless, shapeless bits of stuff. That's everybody says content. Content is the word. And everybody can believe that they're getting exactly the thing that they want to. And artists, which is not really the word because there really isn't a lot of art that goes into this, and there aren't really decisions being made at a formal level. A lot of like Thomas Kincaid style, like we're going to get these, movies and TV shows out on the assembly line, are guys now who get to sort of talk the talk of being and living the lives of artists because they're being financially supported and because they're getting support from a frequently very feckless cultural machine. So, I mean, just as an example, something like the new Skydance animation movie Luck.
Mm-hmm.
Luck, because it was made by Skydance, who have all the money in the world to spend on this stuff, and they got it into Apple TV and they're streaming it there. You're protected a little bit because it's behind the paywall, right? You have to
Yeah.
be able to buy the streaming service to get in there to have an opinion of it. And then Skydance paid for a really cushy press campaign for that film because John Lasseter is now in charge of
Mm-hmm.
Skydance Animation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're still preserving the idea of this mystique. And then you watch the movie and it looks terrible. It's not inventive, and it's got all these really strange ideas from the first major outing from a company that hired a known,
No. Yeah.
predator. And it's
Yeah.
all this stuff about how important it is to work together and how mentors are so important. And so it's just like, because they had all of this stuff in place here, John Lasseter still gets to preserve the mystique of being this like creative genius. The people who work at the company who had no compunction about working with a guy like that with all of these credible allegations against him. And, the Hollywood Reporter will run a piece about, how he's a misunderstood genius and all this stuff. And that is what keeps our very worst ideas exactly where they were. Because a movie
Yeah.
like Luck is just Monsters Inc. or Toy Story or any of these things. It's exactly the same movie that Lasseter has been funding for the last however long, and he will never have to change
Yeah.
because there's no money in changing, and there is so much money set up to make sure that they can just keep churning out these things. I have to imagine that Luck was not a cheap film to produce, but it also does not bear the hallmarks of a work made with care or
Yeah.
a work, frankly, made with all that much money. You go to Netflix and you've got 8-part videos, a TV series directed by the same guy or whoever, and he gets to say that, I'm a genius who's doing this thing and it's my vision. And then you watch it, you can't see anything. You don't really care what's happening anyway. If you could make it out, you wouldn't want to. And it's, a sequel to something or a remake of a forgotten 80s, whatever. Everything is being expanded so that you never have to make creative choices about what to omit. Terrible, terrible programmatic TV about true crime or, it all just falls into this kind of churning, awful thing that is self-replicating. Every time you throw some new thing in there, it spawns 2 more things. And this, of course, is parroted. The same exact marketing logic is what is guiding all of the superhero movies and
Yeah.
all that. We have turned the average consumer of what used to be visual art, good or bad, right? At least credibly, you could have said back in the day, let's say 1950 or something like that, most American movies were made with the care and patience of a canvas, of a painting.
Yeah.
And now nobody cares about any of that stuff. It's all we turn consumers into brand loyalists.
Yeah, no, one of the most glaring examples I think of that was when the press campaign of Thor Love and Thunder was happening, and Taika Waititi had that interview bit where, together, I think, with one of the leading actors, he was sitting in this kind of like white green screen room and was going through various clips of the film and was like, huh,
Yeah.
I didn't know this was in the movie. Oh, this looks kind of weird if you look at it from like a still image. It kind of looks ugly, like this, like basically shitting on the digital labor that went into making the film, that is of course also very much forced down the pipeline. And then basically shitting on all of those companies that are forced to make Disney drag. And then also, I think with the kind of ironic distance, which is for me one of the most toxic things, also not seeming to mean what you actually mean, with an ironic distance, basically trying to remove yourself from the lack of craft and care that seems to be going into it, and saying, oh, but it is funny, isn't it? And there's something so deeply insidious about that as well, that for me symbolizes everything of it.
It's a perfect failsafe because if you don't like the show is saying, yeah, we don't really like this either.
Yeah,
And if you
exactly.
do like it, you get to say that it's because you get the joke. I say this every time I go on any podcast, that the most powerful urge to fight, certainly among Americans, is I get the joke and thus the joke is funny.
Yeah.
Not I get the joke because everybody's been telling the same fucking joke for the last 50 years. It's I'm smarter. I've done the research. They're talking to me directly. I'm the kind of smart guy who gets what they're saying. And it's just turning down the inherent reward of watching a TV show, right? The one thing that everybody really only has the energy to do anymore. You get back from your terrible, soulless day job, or you're working from home because you don't want to die in the apocalypse. And so the only thing that's right in front of you, the only thing that you can guarantee is that you're going to get in an hour or 2 of television a day. And if you're watching TV that is rewarding you for having sat through the last 400 hours of TV, I mean, it's the endorphin thing. They're talking directly to me, which is so funny too, because we have completely erased the barrier between, the studio system and the people in charge, to the point where there are influencer-only press screenings of certain movies.
Exactly, same in the Netherlands.
Yeah, they give more of a shit about people going on TikTok and, doing videos in the lobby or whatever. Not to say that there's anything wrong inherently with that social media form against any other social media form. The stuff that's being made now has to be called content because there is no interaction needed with people who are going to treat it like it's a work of art, right?
Yeah.
And frankly, there's no reason to do that anyway because there are no rewards. If you go looking for decisions being made at a minute level or a grand level, really what you're looking at is board meetings. You're seeing the direct relationship between 6 or 7 people in a boardroom discussing, like, okay, so this guy is popular now, this idea is funny now. There was that famous thing from the Sony email leaks where some executive was talking about how he wanted Spider-Man to say NBD, which made, like, what is it, no big deal, or it's just like, that's how out of touch everybody is. But the thing that's so frustrating is we have all of this. It's all out in the open, has been forever. The Sony email leaks, I mean, obviously it was an important part of that, but we would have lost the romance of the studio system regardless, because all of this shit is free guy now anyway. It's all movies about movies. And even still, people are convincing themselves that despite the fact that this gruel that is tossed in front of you week after week with no care and no emotion and no intention, is still the thing that people should be spending their time watching and caring about. You know,
Mm.
you have all of the proof in the world that people like Taika Waititi have contempt not simply for their audience, but for the people making these movies for them in the next place. And still people rush out to see these things. The Marvel, you know, it's like David Cross years and years ago talked about the thing that made him the most angry about the way that politicians are frequently marketed to the American public is this nonsensical narrative that they care about you. And
Yeah.
there hasn't been a politician that has cared about anybody on the national stage ever. You know, they don't, what does he say? They don't care about you or your mom or your street. They don't give a fuck
If you
about
care,
any of
you
you.
don't go into politics. Exactly.
Exactly right, because that is not a job that rewards the individual, and it's not a job that rewards care for the individual or for the masses. Basically, it's people who took media studies courses who know how to like play. I mean, you know, again, it's this isn't even really a movie I like all that much, but a face in the crowd. It's all
Yeah.
a face in the crowd from the top down studios and food companies and clothing companies and entertainment conglomerates. It's all the same shit. It's they figured out how to play people, and the people know now beyond a shadow of a doubt. They've had the, you know, they've all heard Lawson Rhodes' last speech in that movie, and they still eat it up. That
Yeah.
was the major difference in the last 10 years in this country. They figured out that they're being talked down to, they're being condescended to, they're
Yeah.
being made fun of, and they're being served the worst version of whatever cultural thing they convinced themselves or that they earnestly fell in love with when they were younger. Here it is ad infinitum, getting worse and worse all the time, to the point where something like Sandman, right, which is this beloved Neil Gaiman book,
Yeah.
is getting adapted finally, and I've seen ads for it. I can't imagine getting excited,
I
unfortunately, for something like that because it just looks like Netflix, you
I,
know?
I had the absolute same reaction where I'm like, who's gonna, consume this? But I mean, Scott, like we live in the moment in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and I'm not gonna say that it's much different here, but maybe it is a little bit. You live at the moment in Boston, right? As you
That's
said.
correct. Yeah.
There you have it. Well, all of us, I mean, are I guess terminally online, and we're in our own bubble as well. But how acutely do you sense these things that you're now describing, these phenomena almost of kind of like the gradual worsening of the slope, and people are already accepting that the slope is there, but then also having to accept that the quality is even of a lower grade than it was before? How acutely do you sense it in like, well, maybe not a everyday life, but in the people around you that are also maybe not as invested in film as we are, not as online as we are, not reading and writing the same stuff that we are reading and writing? How do you see that in your surrounding?
I have a remove from the taste of the everyday audience going person. The thing that I had to learn over 10 years of living in New York and working in bars in New York was that nobody really cares. Nobody really cares about, you know, whatever the most exciting thing out is. What they want to do is have the same conversation with as many people as possible because, I mean, and there is no fighting the urge to turn media into a collective thing because like we're saying, we all
Yeah.
really only have time for 6 or 7 parts of our day, and one of them happens to be the piece of TV that seems like it's going to do the most for us, right? That's why reality TV ultimately is such a huge cultural force, because
Yeah.
every episode, you know, the Richter scale of emotion has the, you know, the crazy highs and lows and all that, and there's no fighting that necessarily. And frankly, I don't know that there's any productive way to or reason to fight that stuff.
No, I
People are going to
agree.
like what they like,
Yeah, it's
and
totally
that's
fine.
yeah, exactly. It's absolutely fine. The thing that has changed, I think, for me, and the thing that really like sank my spirits was realizing that the way that I used to hear people talking about let's say celebrity gossip or reality TV stuff, or when I worked in a handful of places in New York, the like the kind of the latest Broadway news and stuff, that film started being slotted into that in that way, that you would hear people talk about riskier, chancier works of art and saying like, I didn't get it, I don't like this at all, it's very terrible, and then moving on to the thing that did interest them, which
Hmm.
was more frequently stuff like Superman stuff. I
Hmm.
remember there was a manager at a restaurant I worked at who really loved Batman versus Superman because it reminded him of a video game he liked playing. And I'm hearing this and I'm like, I could get mad at this and try to like, you know, whatever, explain why as a film critic or whatever. It's like, you know, It's like seeing my childhood bedroom go up in flames or something, like it was so upsetting and depressing. But then it was like, well, that's exactly to the point, is that
Yeah.
if you're constantly rendering everything as this non-stop consumable, and here's the new one, and you got the expansions, and we're fixing the CGI that was bad the last time
Yeah.
around. We're gonna make this work. We're putting it back in theaters. You're never gonna not have to. I think that is the stuff that you find that people are just most interested in. Basically my exposure to the tastes of the, let's say, the average American moviegoer is going to hang out in bars. You know what I mean? Like, that's where you're going to run into people that you don't know, and people who don't know what you do, and you can have a conversation about stuff, and you'll overhear the things that people say. And really what it's become is that the way that people used to talk about, out in the wild, in my own personal experience, I don't want to make this sound like a monolith,
No.
sports teams, or their friends, like dating habits, and the everyday gossip of that stuff has been essentially replaced with people recounting the details of a Star Wars show,
Yeah.
right? That used to be the kind of thing that, like, was reliably an inside joke on shows with writers who loved all that stuff. You go back to, obviously, like Golden Age Simpsons stuff, but then later things like the Michael Schur comedy stuff. That was a joke. It was like underculture or whatever. 30 Rock used to do that. Now that's all there is. These are no longer, inside jokes to a handful of the faithful or whatever, because comic book culture has completely supplanted whatever thing it used to be the alternative to.
Yeah.
And so if you go out any given day, I befriend area bartenders when I go out, just because it's, more fun to sit and talk to somebody than it is to just, at the end of the day, if you're going to have a beer because you have an
Just be
extremely
alone. Yeah.
stressful, stupid day, it's nice to have somebody in front of you who and all that stuff. I'll just sit there, and you hear the way that people talk, and it's really, really bizarre to, like, hear the recounting of, like, a Boba Fett TV show or whatever, as if it's something that happens to them. And it's just so odd, because I've seen clips of those shows. I tried to watch a little of them. So Tucker came over the other day, and we watched the final 10 minutes of the Obi-Wan TV show.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
like, you have to see this, because it's just so infuriating. And it's this hideous day for night intercut with this just indecipherable thing. And the other thing too, that, like, because social media is designed to make you furious so that you, like, stay on your phone and write more, I keep seeing people editing old Star Wars clips and new Star Wars clips, and they're making their own version of it and all that. And again, it's just this will just keep going, because this is all anybody ever cared about, and now they have an excuse to continue to never seek anything else out, because the minute that you're done obsessing over the last Star Wars thing, there's a new Star Wars thing, and you get exactly. And they're all the thing that really, like, blows my mind about this whole thing, right? Okay, so all of Star Wars stuff for the first 30 years of Star Wars as a thing, right? It was all filtered through one sensibility, and that was George Lucas. You could love George Lucas, you could hate George Lucas. That was it. Now, you're getting Star Wars, 6-part epic conclusions, and you're finally going to learn the inside story of the guy who cleans the toilet on Mos Eisley or whatever. Like, every single character gets their own movie and all that. But you're getting them filtered through sensibilities of people that you hadn't heard of until last week.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just, nothing against the TV directors who are doing this stuff. And certainly if you can get, a job doing this, good on you.
Good on you, yeah. More power to you,
More power to you to get that Lucasfilm money, or the Disney money, or Kathleen Kennedy's money. Somebody's cutting you a big check, and that is great. I'm never going to argue with that. But it's just, how is everybody agreeing that this is the best possible outcome for culture, where they've taken the two things that you were obsessed over your entire life, and they've handed them to strangers, people who you don't know and you've never heard of, and who have just been at, last week they were directing episodes of, whatever, 000, or Tales from the Loop, or whatever, or, the Pretty Little Liars. It's all just content. And I don't know how you can separate the fact that this thing has been handed to you with no intention beyond keeping the, the cash machine going at the Disney Corporation. I can't understand deluding yourself in that way. One of the things that always bothered me was, whenever a famous, very populist celebrity comes out as terrible, the urge within these, really, really terrified fandoms is to say, oh, well, we can just like, isn't it funny that J.K. Rowling didn't write Harry Potter anymore? And it's like, no, 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 no. This is not how you do this. We did not
No.
live through Siegfried Krakauer and like all, the fucking, Lenny Riefenstahl coming to Hollywood or the Roman
Yeah.
Polanski letter to simply turn off the fact that the person that you liked has awful politics. Part of being a film critic or a media studies, enthusiast or whatever is having to live with contradictions.
Yeah.
And what we are trying to erase is that there could be contradictions to deal with at all.
I mean, the whole idea, yeah, that art can be without contradictions, that it can either be they're good or they're bad, or they're bad, but I accept that they're good for me because they gave me the thing that I enjoyed in my childhood. It's just, it's
Exactly.
such a insane thing. Well, I do feel like we need to then also now include Ridley and
Oh,
also
yes.
Tony into this conversation, because if we start with Ridley especially, we're talking about this very specific moment in culture as well, and Ridley has this kind of exceptional, I would say, position in it. And you frame it very nicely in your video essay series as well, that somehow he can still get that blockbuster money, make films that are also part of a beloved franchise that he helped create, for instance, the Alien franchise, but
Hmm.
then also can do his uniquely own thing with it, reinvent it in a way that Lucas almost also was able to do with his own prequels, almost even equally controversially for some of the, let's say, more conservative fans of the series as they want it to be. They basically, I guess, only want Alien and Aliens and not the
Right.
rest of it. But somehow he's able to pull all of that off, get a lot of money, but then also make films that virtually nobody really buys tickets for. So he's in this very strange position. And yeah, maybe let's start with him and where he is at now, and then again we will, I guess, retroactively work our way back to also some initial fascination that you and Tucker have for both of the Scott brothers and their position that they had in the 20th century of American cinema.
I mean, beautifully put, that he is absolutely in a unique position, and Lucas was exactly like that. The difference is a crucial one, and it's a matter of outlook. George Lucas was so fascinated with two things, right? He was fascinated with this place he had invented in his mind, right? This universe of characters and all
Yeah.
this stuff. And he was obsessed with technology. He was
Yeah.
obsessed with what can film be that it isn't now, right? And that's why he gave us digital projection and stuff like that. I mean, frankly, he has a lot to answer for. I have put away whatever weirdness I felt about George Lucas because of growing up in an era when the Star Wars prequels were all anyone could talk about and they were
Same here.
everywhere and blah
Same
blah.
here. I
Yeah,
loved
there
him
you
when I
go.
was a kid, I still kind of really like him, but
There is something admirable about them that
yeah.
despite the fact that he was making this quadrillion-dollar enterprise, he managed to make something that at once felt completely alien and yet extremely personal.
Yeah.
It really is, again, the work of a singular mind, and whatever else is true. George Lucas, despite the strangeness of his technical fetishism kind of getting in the way of seeing him this way, to me anyway, he was an artist and probably remains if we could get him to step behind a camera again. But Ridley Scott, I think, is I love him so much because he has a completely unromantic view of the things that George Lucas romanticized. So when returning to the world of Alien, it's funny to hear you describe it like as a beloved franchise. Even that got my hackles up a little bit because I don't believe that Ridley Scott has more than average love for anything that he's done. I know he likes
Yeah.
everything. That, I think, is the difference, is that Ridley Scott, when he decided that it was time to go back to Alien, right? He didn't go back and make some movie about, he didn't do what, unfortunately, Danny McBride and David Gordon Green did, which is treat their creation
Yeah.
like some mythic figure.
Yeah.
Ridley Scott is not an artist with any affection for anything that can't get in the way of whatever the next most important brushstroke is. And so he didn't care. He didn't bring back Ripley. He didn't bring back Sigourney Weaver. He wasn't casting people because he was like, oh, remember this, fans or whatever. He doesn't care about any of that stuff because what matters is what's in front of him. So he grabs the most interesting actors around and throws them into this thing, and he creates these, these kind of mass market operas, these kind of, these things that combine the intense emotional palette of so much of modern art and the
Yeah.
vulgarity that's going to make sure that people are still awake in their seats and create things that really could only be his. I always took offense to in kind of his wilderness years, so to speak, the times when he was really making the movies that Americans wanted to see, which is a funny way to think of it, that when he was making his most popular movies, he was maybe at his least interesting as an image maker, because there's really only so much you can do when you're doing something like White Squall. White Squall, perfectly normal, there's nothing wrong with that movie, but you're telling a story first, right? You got to tell the story first.
Sure.
He always talks about that. And so there isn't as much opportunity to be as expressionistic as he is these days, or impressionistic, frankly. And so while he was doing that, he really kind of fell out of favor with a lot of people. And a lot of people turned against him, sort of, the English language critics and stuff, because to them, he represented the establishment.
Yeah.
And now he's a true
underdog.
Yeah, right, exactly. He's the underdog. He went from white elephant to termite, just like that. And it was really just in deciding that he was going to continue to pursue things that made the most sense to him imagistically, 1 minute after another. And it really is quite fascinating to see, that he's in his late cinema period right now, and yet the movies are, if anything, sort of more understandable and visceral than they ever have been.
I agree. I mean, The Last Duel is a masterclass in how you can make a mainstream film that is as visceral, as as dedicated, as intense, but also in a way as sincere as it is. It's like there's not a lot of films that also then place that much emphasis on a personal subjective experience anymore, it seems. And I was very taken away by that film, and I think that film also quite late and maybe really triggered me to revisit some of his earlier films of the 21st century, including Exodus, for instance, a film that when it came out in 2014 was a film that I really didn't like, or really couldn't enjoy, couldn't find myself accepting that it existed. And now I see a lot of merit in it, a lot of strength, a lot of beauty as well.
I'm glad you brought that one up, because that one to me is really, really fascinating in the way that he is, as he always tries to do, to navigate the demands of, what contemporary audiences might want or think they want. I think if the film is a failure, it's essentially in trying to retrofit the kinds of movies that he saw and made, making millions of dollars even 10 years earlier, in the likes
Your
of Kingdom of Heaven.
Gladiators, your Kingdom of Heaven, yeah.
Exactly. And essentially trying to do it in a more modern, temporary film language. He's got digital, he's working through that stuff, and he's like, okay, well, let's see if we can make this again with these new tools. But still sort of obeying an old Hollywood thing that if there aren't stars in it, then nobody's going to go see it. And so you wind up making this very compromised, weird vision of, biblical times featuring a number of British and Australian actors and stuff like that. And that movie also very funny because it has Sigourney Weaver, which is his, he's doing it because he loves Sigourney Weaver. They're friends forever, and they made this foundational work together. And rather than put her in an alien movie, he's like, no, come over here and play the Queen of the Nile or whatever, just absolute nonsense. But then that's still sort of touching. And that's the thing. You can see when you can actually work out the decisions being made in a work of art. To me, that's like, there's nothing better. That's why I go, is because I want to be wowed. Certainly, I want to feel things. I want to cry and scream and laugh, but also you get to know people through the visual art that they give you. And Exodus is a really personal film. It is. I mean, that is one of the most transparent movies ever made. But that isn't a problem, like it can be with other things, where when some movies you're just like, oh, I can see why they did this, because this movie's popular, this actor's popular, and they just threw them together. Somebody had a 3-picture deal and they're trying to capitalize on this, or, Shondaland needs content. Exodus is a movie where you can see every decision being made, but to me, they give you a window into the guy making them, and not necessarily the system. The system failed there in kind of allowing that movie to get made. But in hindsight, that movie is actually quite gripping, and that was the first one he made after Tony died.
Yeah.
And just, there's something really touching to me about making this big, glossy, old school biblical epic at a time when you're also creating some of the defining works of empty universe theory, just these kind of like nihilistic atheist things where there is no God, there's only a Nazi robot. Like, it's the conversations that he's having with himself and with the universe, to me, are absolutely some of the most rewarding things he's ever done. Because, again, you talk about Last Duel, talk about individual perspective, and how that movie goes out of its way to, when presenting things, to be at a distance, at a remove, so that it doesn't feel like it's, kind of making sure that you're aware of anything other than the actions being performed, because I think it perhaps overplays its hand here, but the idea is you must decide. You and the audience must make up your mind about these things. And I kind of think that that's also a comment on just, what has become of the film landscape regardless, is you have to be a much more active viewer to get something out of a movie like The Last Duel. And I feel that that has essentially gone away from the consideration of 80% of American, moving images right now. It's one hesitates to call it art, but a work of art like The Last Duel does ask these questions of the thing. And that's so edifying that the
Yeah.
man that I was completely in love with as a child, right? I loved every movie of his that I saw. I was obsessed. We went to all of them in theaters. That he has remained interesting, that he is still asking questions, or rather making movies that ask questions of our place, as viewers, as independent thinkers, as people. It's still really cool to go to a movie, even something as kind of nakedly, sort of reality TV-esque as House of Gucci, which I
Yeah.
really enjoyed, and be thinking about these things. That's a movie, Lady Gaga's in it. It's like, it couldn't be more, here you go, America. Here's
Yeah.
everything that you want right now. Here's all of our great hams, and, like, just every performance is a meal. And still walk away actually thinking about things, whatever you want to say about some of the thing, like Exodus or All the Money in the World or House of Gucci. There's still questions being asked, and there are still things to latch onto and think about, and they're thorny and all that. And Tony was the king of that stuff. Tony's movies are frequently very ugly, in their worldview and outlook, and the things that he makes you see to get to the end of this journey are harrowing at times. But with this kind of, again, this and he invented it, basically. I wanted to say this like Hollywood slickness, but that's Tony's slickness.
Totally. And I really wanted to get to him also because we talked about Exodus, the first film being made also, or like being released after Tony's passing. And the specter of Tony Scott, like, he started making the film before Tony passed away.
No. He bought the property before Tony passed, but he didn't start filming.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, that makes it even more interesting, I guess.
Yeah, he was on the set of The Counselor when he got the news. He took some time off of making The Counselor, which is again a great fucking movie.
Yeah,
great
I know,
movie.
absolutely fucking amazing. But yeah, so the specter of Tony, it's very much present in 2022 as well. We had Top Gun Maverick, of course, this summer as well.
Absolutely.
If you watch Ambulance by Michael Bay, you can of course, that screaming Tony Scott.
Absolutely.
The specter of Tony is also very much, of course, in the video essay series that you make, and I think that both you and Tucker found a very interesting and also respectful, but also very inquisitive form to, let's say, discuss how the passing of Tony Scott has not only affected Ridley, but then in the reverberation of that has also affected American cinema. So it's a very broad question, but maybe we can just take Tony as this singular entity almost in American film and have that kind of like bounce of all of these ideas as where we are now with American film, but also what he added to American film when he came on the scene. What is so uniquely compelling about a Tony Scott film for you?
The through line that we kept coming back to as we were making the project was this sense of these two guys having created a monster, basically, that in making Alien, which then leads into Aliens,
yeah,
Ridley Scott helps this kind of system of sequels of again, the kind of the replication of culture happen. That every Alien movie released has been fascinating. Good, bad, doesn't matter. They've been interesting, and they've been made by artists with very specific aesthetic concerns and moral concerns as well. Certainly somebody like David Fincher has a very bleak worldview, and that's part of why that movie is so compelling, despite the fact that it was a mess to make, and he has sort of turned against it. And then you've got Tony, right? Tony comes to Hollywood, and he's got this sensibility that they see Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. They see a car commercial he makes, and they think, okay, how can we take this car commercial energy and apply it to the mainstream cinema, right? Where somebody like Tom Cruise had been a burgeoning star. Ridley had even worked with him on Legend, but he wasn't Tom Cruise yet. No. He wasn't Tom Cruise yet until Top Gun. And so Top Gun, is the birth of the American blockbuster. And it kind of took us making this project or planning this project to see how that had become true, where it's the only difference is that Tony did not build in fail safes into the works of art that he was making. He was all in because he was trying to sell you something, right? He was a visual artist, don't get me wrong.
Mhm,
I don't mean
mhm.
to, but that's the thing, is that he had the energy that he was going to make you believe in the thing that he was going to show you because he needed you to buy the car at the end of the thing, right? And so Top Gun, Days of Thunder, and Crimson Tide are kind of the trilogy
Mhm.
there of selling
Totally.
you these American ideals. And there isn't a moment where he winks at you, even with people like Shane Black and Quentin Tarantino writing the screenplays, which I think Tony saw as a interesting and certainly popular addition to the way that modern action films are made, right? Where they're referencing themselves and they're kind of talking to you and they're winking at you and all that stuff. And that unfortunately led to the Joss Whedonification of the rest of
I know.
American.
I mean, that's where the real monster got made. It seems.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, Joss Whedon, sees these things happening. He sees Last Boy Scout and True
Yeah.
Romance and Pulp Fiction, and that's what, to me, I would say that probably had as much to do with his continued sort of prevalence in American culture, is that he kept seeing other people do it well, and so he kept convincing himself that he could also do it well, and so it's just like. The thing that has always driven me completely insane about Joss Whedon is the fact that he kept trying to give people ideas. People kept saying no. And so
Yeah.
then he'd wait 2 years and he'd say, but I'm going to do it right this time. And you're going to like it this time. That he has completely fallen out of favor to me has just been so gratifying because
It is very redemptive, but for every like Joss Whedon that goes away, there's like 3 even more mediocre offshoots that
oh,
that
yeah.
suddenly arise.
Yeah.
I mean, Taika Waititi is probably one of the worst directors that I've ever seen helm like a major like spectacle
Yep.
movie, and somehow he gets away with it as well because he seems like the more agreeable version of Joss Whedon. Even though I
Yep.
feel like in a couple of years he'll also be tweeted and posted into the ground. He makes movies now on a type of proposition that just can't hold. It's a thing that will have to burst that bubble of like identity, ironic, distance, layered.
You can't hang your hat on the sort of dialogue in your movies doing all of the work for you
Exactly.
as a person, as a citizen or whatever. Taika, if he can be said to be having a positive effect on culture, it's that he's throwing money at good creators. And that is really the one thing that makes me not glad that we have to deal with him constantly, because without him, we don't have Reservation Dogs, and without him, we don't have What We Do in the Shadows, right? And
Yeah.
so these things with different and interesting perspectives and the kinds of characters and people that you wouldn't necessarily see in the shows that they're doing, like Reservation Dogs is a really important thing in American TV, and I'm really happy we have it. And so I can't completely say I wish this man would go away, because he did make that possible. But you're not wrong. He is a truly terrible filmmaker. I mean, just one of our very worst image makers. And again, that's the crucial difference, is that Tony didn't make movies where you can say I'm smarter than the film,
Yeah.
and thus it doesn't matter that it looks terrible, because they didn't look terrible. They looked
No,
fantastic.
they look fantastic. They're
They look
beautiful. Every single shot of him.
every single shot, and to the point where by the time he's making Man on Fire and Domino and Deja
Mhm.
Vu, it's not simply every single shot, because every single shot sometimes has 6 or 7 shots in it. He's doing these.
Exactly.
He was directing at the speed of thought, this man.
Yeah.
And just every movie, no matter how vulgar, no matter how crass, no matter how strange and MTV'd up it all got, it was always art first.
Well, I have maybe a metaphor. It's from one of the commercials that Ridley Scott made that you also reference in your video essay series. It's the Apple commercial, the famous 1984
1984,
Apple
sure.
commercial. Mark Fisher, the famous theorist and art critic from the UK, he once referenced that commercial as well and used it as a big example of this kind of like future shock that was part of culture, mainstream culture in the 20th century. He often uses future shock to describe the music that was coming from the club. But in a way, you could say that future shock as a concept could also apply to some of the films that Ridley Scott has made, and definitely also some of the films that Tony Scott has made. And I mean, Domino is definitely one of those examples where, as you said, it's a film that's working at the speed of thought. It's kind of a whiplash kind of mainstream cinema that, I mean, now a lot of people are, again, still replicating, like Michael Bay did with Ambulance,
Mm-hmm.
very well. I would say that he replicated it, but it's still in the sense replication of a thing also already made. A thing that's coming back in your video essay series as well is, where do the ideas come from to create new images? Also, where do the new images come from? Tony and Ridley, especially Ridley, of course, really referenced a lot of like classical art. You also cite that other video essay, which I forgot the creator of it,
Hiroshi.
Yeah, fantastic video essay about painting references that you can find in the films of Ridley Scott. But yeah, this idea just of creating new images seems to be at the heart of a crisis of the 21st century, because it's not only new images, it's of course also maybe new stories, new ideas, new aesthetical modes of production. It's not only in film, it's also in music. Maybe it's also in literature. I don't know. Maybe it's also in painting.
I think you're right that essentially what has replaced the search for and the need to create new things, at least on the level of your four quadrant blockbuster and all that, has been the idea of essentially audience flattery. It's not
Yeah.
trying to convince people that there's viable, new, exciting things to be done in whatever art form that they're doing. Frequently, it's about as accurately describing the worlds that people create on social media spaces and things like that, so that everybody feels safe.
Yeah, everybody's included.
Exactly, movies included. This is an era of comfort, right? You turn on the TV, people are going to talk exactly like you do, right? Because all the writers' rooms are trolling social media to make sure that they're using the latest references and lingo and all that stuff. It's become easier than ever to rail against this stuff because it is so transparent. You know exactly the decisions that go into this. I mean, more than that, I would kill to watch something that doesn't look like anyone else could have made it. And that has all but completely gone away. We talk about Michael Bay. Michael Bay, of course, kind of born in the image of Tony, and I think
Yeah.
he gets a lot of shit, certainly, but I think he's doing an honorable job of creating moving images. Like, yes, certainly there's something to be said for the color palette of those movies having not really changed all that much, but then that's what he does. He's an artist. He found his way
Yeah.
that he shoots things, and he does that. He's a complicated guy. He's not an easy
Totally,
man to
totally.
like, but it doesn't matter because, again, it's art, and that's what it's supposed to be. Even those Transformers movies I've kind of come around on, where there is
Me
still
too,
more going
actually, to
on.
be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much happening in those things, and they
Mm.
are diagnostic tools as much as anything about what
Yeah,
Americans wanted, what the world box office wanted, because those movies
totally.
did so well in China. It's this very bizarre and frequently cloying navigation of the needs of a people, right? A movie going public that's still more telling and more revealing, and also so beautiful to look at that I would rather have something that seems as completely hollow and vulgar as Transformers Age of Extinction or whatever,
Yeah,
which is an exhausting experience, don't get me
absolutely.
wrong.
Yeah.
But more is, to me, always going to be better than less in these situations, because the rest of the time, I mean, a movie like Free Guy I find to be very, very telling about where we are right now, because
Yeah.
if you took any given still of that film, you would confuse it for a commercial for something, right? And not like,
Yeah, for like a pharmacy company or a
yeah,
bank.
for a pharmaceutical company or like Airbnb or like clothing company, like a Gap
Yeah.
ad. All the clothes in that movie are so, sort of like designed to stand out more than the actors'
Mm-hmm.
faces.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks awful. There's zero visual imagination went into that film. And I watched isolated, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and I couldn't do it. Frankly, it made me sick to my stomach to watch that film. I don't think I've seen a worse artifact of the last several years. It reminds me of like post-war propaganda or something. Like if after the end of World War II or something, we made a movie about like Americans running a German POW camp or something. That's what it would
Yeah.
feel like. It would be like history grinningly and awfully and smugly written by the victors. It's, you've already killed culture, and now you're celebrating yourself for having done it.
That's why it's so ironic that your video essay series is called The End of History as well, and that you also, reference Fukuyama, but
Oh
then
yeah.
also not take his most obvious standpoints, but feed it back into his ideas about identity and representation as just this sliver of kind of like civility almost that keeps us from like showing the
Yeah.
beast man that we really are or something. It was very funny that you went there, and I really appreciated that. Very well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'm like obsessed with that kind of like pop, social philosophy and all this, just because, as with, mass media and all that stuff, it is easier than it has ever been to be a complete fucking grifter and get
Yeah.
away with these
It's so
half-baked.
preposterous, but
Oh,
then
it's
it also
ridiculous.
but it sticks, and somehow it seems like, again, we're living in a shittier version of the world that Fukuyama had envisioned for ourselves
Yeah.
in a way. Like, I've come around on the Fukuyama essay multiple times because there is something weirdly diagnostically prophetic about what he is saying as well, because it applies to where we're at now as well in a strange sense.
The thing I think that's kind of interesting about that essay is it's not that he predicted the world we live in.
No.
He predicted the attitude we have about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Looking back at this and him being like, well, nothing will ever rise to, crumble, liberal democratic capitalism. And I'm like, well, no, but it will completely destroy itself to the point
Yeah.
that it's a dystopia, which you couldn't have predicted because you were rich. And that
Yeah.
doesn't matter to you. It never mattered the trickle-down effect of this stuff, to quote another fucking ghoul.
Yeah.
No, but he couldn't have possibly predicted that, yeah, maybe we're stuck in this kind of, nonsensical, 3 times removed copy of neoliberalism as we understood it in, Reagan's 1980s. But that has been the death of culture, of all things.
Mhm.
Why do we constantly have these totems of neoliberalism to just wrap ourselves into the point that we're choking ourselves with them? If not to constantly say that there is no better form of governance, that the thing that gives us figures of complete uselessness, any of the people that are on our television night and day, who have done nothing for us. And that is, the thing that everybody wants from our movies, from our fucking Free Guys and our Eternals, is that nothing has changed, and the things that will change are going to be under the auspices of,
they will be even more familiar than they already were.
to the point where you're gonna one day
Yeah.
turn on the TV to watch Marvel something or other, and they're gonna have a fucking fight that comes into your living room while you're watching the TV, and you're not gonna look up from the television while it's happening in front of you. It's just everybody wants to be flattered by the thing in front of them. They want to turn on the TV and have the TV say, "You're my best friend." I mean, it's that scene from The Room, right? "You're my best
Yeah.
customer, Johnny." How do you stop something where every single person on Earth, let's say minus, I don't know, 300,000 people, right?
Yeah.
Are on this rocket ship to oblivion with regards to our images. I mean, even somebody like Ridley Scott, right? Somebody that you could say was the guy for major American entertainment for, 2 decades, 3
Yeah.
decades. Even he has fallen out of favor.
Yeah.
We talk about in the movie how stunning it was to see somebody who created the world be excluded from it, essentially.
Yeah.
That they're like, oh, we don't want your images anymore. The truth is, we never wanted your images.
No.
What we wanted was the idea that you were going to keep giving us these things to obsess over, right? But we don't obsess in the way that we used to anymore. What we do is we collect 6 or 7 facts, and we roll them around in our hands, and we put them down, and then we, discuss how they landed, then we pick them up, and we throw them down again. It's just so depressing. It's just so horrifying to see the glee with which people have abandoned the idea of there being new things to talk about, things to see and do and think.
Well, Scout, there's one glimmer of hope, and I'm sincerely hoping that you'll be on my side with this one, because there's one also director, one specter, you could say, also of the Scots that we haven't talked about that much, and that is, of course, James Cameron. I'm a major fan of Avatar, and I'm really, really excited for Avatar: The Way of the Water, because I feel like, in a strange way, isn't he the last one that is actually able to navigate all of this? Because he has still, in a sense, you could say, a singular vision. You could say that he has watered it down a bit with Avatar. However, I saw it yesterday again, and I'm still quite amazed with some of the immediacy and primacy and brutality of some of the imagery in it as well. But that's a film that he made 13 years ago, and that was also very much intended to set up a grander vision that he wants to show us, I guess, with Avatar 2 and 3 that are already in the can, and 4 and 5 that still need to be shot and edited. Yeah, I mean, can we talk about where Cameron and Avatar sit in all this? Because that seems to be kind of like the final vestige of all of this in a strange way, a weird safe haven or a compromise where we can all agree that we actually like it.
Well, here's what I'll say is that I have absolutely come around on James Cameron. I mean, it happened twice because I grew up with his movies, right? I grew up with
Yeah.
True Lies.
I mean,
and
of course
Aliens.
you love it, yeah.
I love James Cameron as a young moviegoer. True Lies, that movie is perfect. Talk about vulgarity. That movie is as crass as they come, and yet absolutely works. Absolutely fascinating. So cool. But then Titanic and Avatar, I couldn't find myself in those movies. They felt a little like they were kind of repelling me as a viewer, right? I mean, that's a long time to be on the outs with the director, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's like decades almost.
Exactly. It is like decades. And then maybe it was just missing the feeling of having enjoyed him so much. I decided to, kind of think about what he's actually doing. And this was around the time of Elita, right? Which he produced and helped write.
Which I love as well.
it's not a movie for me, and that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, I am notoriously not the everyday viewer, but what really fascinated me about Alita was the response from the trans community.
Yeah.
And so looking into that and being like, okay, I'm not going to take against this thing just because it doesn't appeal to me. Let's think about what he's doing here. And then you look into the fact that he spent a boatload of money donating to the cause of giving prosthetic limbs to veterans. And
Yeah.
then he produced Terminator Dark Fate, which I do really
Yeah.
love.
Mm-hmm.
And that is another very interesting text when viewed through the lens of this kind of burgeoning canon of trans cinema, right?
Yeah.
I don't mean to speak for everybody, and certainly there are better writers that you can read who are actually have experience, you know, living the life of a trans moviegoer. You should seek out those voices. You should seek out as many trans critics as you can. You will never be disappointed by the things that they make you think about. I owe so much of my engagement with media in the last 10 years to some of the great trans film critics, Caden Mark Gardner and Willow McClay, and
yeah, they're fantastic.
Esther
and
Rosenfield.
I mean, you have in the Unloved, you also have the Resident Evil episode. I think
Yes,
it's Afterlife
yes.
or Retribution.
Afterlife.
Which one?
Well,
Afterlife.
yeah. All three of those
all
last
three of
Resident
those,
Evil movies are fucking fantastic.
I
But
love
that's the thing.
those
Is
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, W. Sanderson, another guy that I really didn't like for a long time, but I really love him. I really do respect what he's doing. And so James Cameron became a figure that I understood was not simply trying to just do the things that he does in Avatar, right? Avatar, a very surface level movie in a number of ways, right? It's plot points you've seen before, and images that are very clear. That was the thing. So I made peace with the fact that I don't like that as a piece of moving images, but there is no denying ultimately that what he's trying to do is give the American cinema this kind of roller coaster experience that it so often, you know, has demanded of it by our audiences.
Yeah.
In a way that gets them thinking about things from a more empathetic standpoint. I mean, we missed the point, we always do, but that is a really important work of art, and I am so excited for the new one.
The trailer gave me so much hope because it seems also like the first one, it, like you say, it definitely has some like flat moments, or it's definitely very surface level, but at the other end, who else on that scale in 2009 was working on that level against American imperialism?
It's true.
I mean, against the
year that the Hurt Locker won Best Picture, yeah.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like the personal drama that's behind that as well. I mean, it's very interesting, you know, if you would approach it from kind of like a more gossipy perspective. It is very funny that that film shared that year with the Hurt Locker.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just something still so weirdly, oddly, and compellingly refreshing about that film 13 years ago, which, to, you know, circle back all the way to the beginning, kind of exactly proves the point of your video essay series, but also of the episode, you know, the conversation that we're having today, that this film 13 years later shouldn't be still so unique and so compelling and so refreshing as it is compared to any other mainstream film that got released in the last couple of years. Because now in the Netherlands, this month or next month, Avatar 1 will get a 4K re-release. So in the cinema, of course, to get everybody excited and ready for Avatar 2. But strangely enough, it is the most exciting blockbuster film that will be released in the fall schedule. Yeah, and then the next more exciting film will be Avatar 2. But those are basically the only one that we're looking forward to. And that's, I mean, to be honest, quite crazy to me, you know, that's like such a drought, such a scarcity of the good ones.
Here's the thing. How is it that as so many of our artists, right, who helped create the kind of very violent culture that was, you know, the bulk of the 90s and into the 2000s and stuff, I think, again, the 9/11 cinema stuff, I think, really threw people because it scared people off of a certain kind of violence where you can only do it through this or that lens. Because, I mean, Domino's a great example, right? Domino's a movie that revels in its own, you know, vulgarity and crassness. And it was kind of, people took against it. It didn't get good reviews. It didn't really make its money back. But now we have all of these guys who were so important to the foundation of American cinema who are still making movies that are fascinating, right? And they've become some of the only reliable image makers and or, you know, idea men or whatever you want to say in the American cinema, where James Cameron, Ridley Scott, Martin Scorsese, and I mean, Clint Eastwood's, I guess, retired, which is a bummer, but those were these are the guys who are still making movies about culture, but not of culture.
Yeah.
And that is what we should all be trying to do, because if you're just feeding into the things that people have already taken money doing, what are you really up to? What are you doing? What are you contributing? You're just, you know, taking the same paychecks that you would have beforehand. The idea that Ridley Scott is making a Napoleon movie right now is great because I cannot fucking wait for that. Holy shit.
How on point is that? The film that also many other people have tried to make, or a story that many other people have tried to tell through the lens of cinema, never really came off the ground. And then Ridley Scott I mean, but that's also a question that I wanted to ask, because Tom Cruise, in a sense, you could say, has a Napoleonic complex. You know, when he makes a Mission
Certainly,
Impossible
certainly.
movie, when he's making Top Gun, when he's, you know, putting so much of his own body literally in the battlefield, almost of cinema. He is
Yeah,
one of those champions of that kind of film. You could say James Cameron, in his own kind of like distinct way, basically placing one of the biggest bets, I guess, in the history of the medium, to
yeah,
make a couple of the most expensive films in a row with no guarantee that they will really still be the success that they were 13 years ago. I
yeah.
mean, there's some of that, like, this could be his kind of like Napoleonic stride as well. Is it for you on point that it is Ridley Scott that is making the Napoleon movie at this time?
Well, I mean, he is probably our foremost Kubrickian, not
Yeah,
aesthetically, but
yeah,
thematically.
yeah,
Where I mean, and when we did the little montage of all the little
exactly.
Kubrick references throughout his thing, but the difference is, and the reason that I just fucking love him so much, he loved Stanley Kubrick, but he did not make movies like Stanley Kubrick, right?
Yeah,
He made his own movies. He
yeah,
made his
there's
own art,
no pastiche
and
of him.
exactly, exactly, exactly. Because he is an earnest image maker, and I
Yeah,
just the idea that there is no irony to what he's doing. There's no protective layer. It's the same thing. That
yes,
ultimately, I think, is really the only difference between Top Gun and Maverick. Is Maverick is a much softer movie. It's a great movie. If
yeah,
anything, it might be a more satisfying experience, but
true.
it doesn't have the strength of conviction of the original
Yes,
Top Gun, which I find
yes,
very interesting. I mean, part of that, like you're saying, is the Tom Cruise image curation machine, which is fine. We have to put up with Tom Cruise being an evil man, but we're getting some of the great art out of it. So what are you gonna
exactly.
do?
Yeah, it's a trade-off
Um,
again.
exactly. But Ridley Scott making the Napoleon movie, I think, is perfect because you can so see the ways that he's been sort of chasing the high of seeing some of the Kubrick films for the first time, and so giving people these things in a way that is more of a commercially minded view of things. Hypothetically speaking, I have no idea what Napoleon's going to look like when it comes out. It could be anything, which is really exciting.
Yeah,
I think it's beautiful because it's one more thing to say, this is an artist who meant something to me. And don't you remember a time when you could go to see a movie and feel like you were seeing something that no one else was going to show you, right?
yeah,
That is the feeling that he's trying to preserve. And by picking a subject that really meant something to Stanley Kubrick, to the point where he had a room in his house
yeah.
filled with cards where you could open up a drawer and there's a card and it'll tell you on exactly what day what Napoleon was doing that day. To make something in his way that is a kind of a tribute to that idea is just so awesome. And it's going to be good because it won't be somebody who thinks that they're going to outsmart Stanley Kubrick and
Yeah,
make their version of it, right? I'm making all the
exactly.
decisions Kubrick would have made. No, you're not.
No,
Nobody is. And
no.
that's the fun thing, is that now it won't be twice filtered through two different sensibilities. It will just be Ridley Scott's version of it. And I think that that's what all things should be. It is your version that no one else could have done. And that is why James Cameron, Ridley Scott, it's maybe a little, silly to still be talking about the same filmmakers,
I
from
know.
before I was born.
Yeah, but hey, that's the cards that we got dealt, you know.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I'm just grateful that there are still good forces at work.
Scout, I want to end with a personal note, because you recently shared the news that the rights are also picked up for an adaptation of a book that your father wrote that will be helmed by Ridley Scott, which is, I must presume, an absurd honor. Can you tell a little bit about this situation and what that means to you, as well as such a, a critic, an art lover, but also such a devoted scholar, we could by now say, of Ridley Scott himself as well?
it's I mean, it's unfucking real. I mean, it's very important that we say this, obviously, that, Ridley Scott is now helping to pay off my student loan debt. So, obviously.
Oh, so this is, well,
Yeah,
okay.
it's
I think
all, yeah,
we
exactly.
need to scratch this episode. This is
Scratch
just
the whole
like
bucket.
tooting your own horn here.
It's really, I mean, it blew both of us away because
Yeah.
my dad showed me Ridley Scott movies when I was a kid, and we went and saw all of them in theaters: Gladiator, Kingdom of Heaven, Black Hawk Down. I mean, these are very important movies to me when I was a young, because I genuinely, this whole week, I felt 13 years old. It is fucking wild to me that this is happening, and this is a guy who really means a lot to my dad too. And
Fantastic.
the thing I hope that people take away now, of course, that I'm part of the Scott free machinery here, giving him free press all the
It's a
time.
nepotism baby.
Yeah, I'm a nepotism baby. Yeah, finally. But the thing I hope that people can take away is that we did this whole series before we knew that this was going to happen, and we still are critical of a lot of what he
Of
does, because
course.
part of loving something is knowing that they're not infallible.
This is also how we started the episode, right? I mean, it is also, we're critiquing because of the love that we have for the things, right?
The great Salman Rushdie talked about, we can say this because unfortunately the terrible news that he was attacked early this week for presumably for having ideas that people don't like, is that a free society is not one without conflict. A free society is full of debates and criticism and different viewpoints. It's the way in which we comport ourselves in it that makes the difference. And unfortunately, a lot of people couldn't handle the ideas of Salman Rushdie or frankly anybody. And it turns them against one another, and they seek the comfort of things that they trust. And I think that somebody like Ridley Scott is making, and James Cameron too, making our society more interesting by giving us things that we do want to have passionate arguments about.
That we want to have conversations about in the bar after we've experienced them together. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And that's the most beautiful thing in the world. And so, yeah, obviously I now owe Ridley Scott more than I could ever possibly repay him, not simply for a lifetime of images, but for making my father's dream come true. And it's what a fucking week, man. I gotta tell you, I've been high on this since they dropped the news item. It's really fucking cool, and I just love Ridley Scott with all my heart. So there it is.
Very, very, very happy and excited for you, and also for ourselves, because then it also is a proof that there will be another Ridley Scott work in the works. So it's something to look out to for all of us. Well, Scout, it's a pleasure. Before I let you go, is there anything you want to plug? Other works that you've been doing recently that you want to share for everybody? Also, Scout Tafoya, his Twitter handle is Honors Zombie. He has a Patreon as well, Honors Zombie. Find it out. Vimeo account as well. Patreon sets you back only a couple of bucks per month, and you get so much great criticism and video essays and other stuff in return. But is there anything in specific that you want to point people towards, that you wrote or made or shot or directed or anything else?
First of all, thank you very much for plugging the Patreon. Yeah, please go there. It's every week. It's a new video essay and 2 Patreon exclusive pieces of criticism and a flashback or the occasional odd, feature I couldn't find a home for elsewhere. I just had a piece run on RogerEbert.com about Eric von Stroheim's Foolish Wives, which is celebrating its 100th birthday this year. Really excited.
Eric Stroheim as the Kanye West of the 1920s. Yeah. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. And I have 26 feature films you can watch. You just have to Google them. They're on Vimeo on demand. And yeah, I mean, there's just always going to be stuff coming out. You should go to Ignite Films and join their newsletter. I'm curating a critical section over there at Ignite. We got a lot of really cool stuff running there. We've had a piece from Willow McClay, a piece from A.A. Dowd. Yeah, join the Patreon if you can. $4 a month gets you a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. I'd really appreciate that. And yeah, that's that. Oh, I wrote a book on Tobe Hooper. Buy my book on Tobe Hooper. There you go. Sorry, yes. Cinemophagy.
It's a fantastic book. Buy it.
Thank you very much, Hugo. You guys. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Hugo. This is so fun. Thanks for having me, making time.
It was a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Yeah,
we went long. Good luck, Elliot, with the edit. All right, bless you, Scout. Have a beautiful day over there, and hope to talk to you soon.
All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much.